Let's move on really quick to some drama with the Los Angeles Lakers, who predictably, on one of the slowest days of this first round of the postseason, had some drama release. And again, with this kind of thing, you never know who it's coming from or what the ultimate goal is. But Eric Pincus from Bleacher Report wrote an article today talking about both the Nets and the Lakers and their situations with stars and their influences on the front office. And obviously, the article was targeting a bigger issue with the construction of super teams and NBA superstars playing a very, very hands-on role in the construction of rosters. And we're going to talk about that in just a second, but there was a nugget in there about the Lakers specifically that I wanted to touch on before we get to that point. So, from Eric Pincus, quote, "But James certainly has a strong influence on the Lakers' decision-making. Multiple sources indicate that the team's front office is internally blaming pressure from Clutch Sports Group, representing both James and Davis, for Westbrook. That may be an epic level of passing the buck. An NBA team should consider its stars' wishes, but ultimately make the best decision for the team." End quote. Little bit of a personal opinion there from Pincus at the end that I 100% agree with. I cannot take credit for this specific take because it comes from my friend Harrison Fagan at Silver Screen and Roll. But he said it this morning, and I thought it was a perfect encapsulation of this situation. You know, it's fine for the Lakers to take credit when they get the trophy. In 2020, I didn't see any reporting or any leaks from Rob Pelinka or from Jeannie Buss about how actually it was LeBron and Clutch Sports who pushed for the necessary moves to build a championship winning roster. But now that things are going south, they're wanting to lead you guys to believe that LeBron and Rich Paul held these guys at gunpoint to make the Russell Westbrook deal. And that's ridiculous. Now, you guys know how I feel about stars getting involved in personnel decisions. It's the same thing I said about Rob Pelinka during all this drama from the beginning. You know, in order to be a general manager in this league, you have to have a certain amount of dedication to diving into film. Because player evaluation, it's just like all of you guys as casual fans. If you turn on the right game and you watch Malik Beasley from the Minnesota Timberwolves, you might think he's a max contract player. There are days where he looks like Bradley Beal out there. But then there are other games when it's not so much. And that's the job of the GM. You have to consume enough total content of one player to have a clear picture of what they actually are like on a day in, day out basis. You might have to look at them in different circumstances. It gets even more complicated when you're looking at younger players, like before they make it to the league, because then you've got to consider, are they at a college program that's adequately, that's running a professional enough style of program to capitalize on what this player and his talent brings to the table. It's a difficult job. And so I have a problem with guys like LeBron and guys like KD being more hands-on because they don't have the time to actually evaluate players properly. So I agree from that standpoint. But at the same time, no one did point a gun at Rob Pelinka and make him make that deal. You guys made the decision to allow whatever ask Clutch Sports had in this situation. And so as a result, trying to turn the blame on LeBron is ridiculous. If that's the case, let's go ahead and pull down that banner. Let's take down that 17th championship banner. Let's rip it up. Let's make a new one, and we'll put Clutch Sports on it, 2020 NBA champions, and we'll hang it up in Clutch Sports headquarters. Because that's the type of lame-ass attitude this is. Shirking the blame when things go wrong and accepting the responsibility when things go right, which I have a huge problem with. But that said, this has brought an interesting dynamic to the forefront in this playoff run. You have three major star-run super teams in the league. You've got Kawhi and Paul George and what they've done with the Clippers. You have LeBron James and Anthony Davis and what they did with the Lakers. And you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie and what they did with the Brooklyn Nets. And all three of those teams secured precisely 0 playoff wins this year. Zero. So the question becomes, is this mold a failure? Is it time as a league to move beyond that mold? Kind of reminds me in the NFL and a little bit in the NBA of like the coach GM concept. There was a time period where a lot of the top tier coaches in both leagues would demand decision over player personnel in addition to their coaching responsibilities. And then some years went by and it became pretty clear based on the results that even the best coaches, the hardest working coaches in the league, simply didn't have enough time to properly evaluate players and to make those types of decisions. And they were too intimately involved to be objective. And so as a result, now you don't see that very often. There are a handful of cases around the league. Like I know Greg Popovich still has some role in player personnel there in San Antonio, but it's rare. It's unusual. And it's more of like a consulting type of role. Should you go ask LeBron? Should you go ask KD, what do you think about this? Absolutely. That to me is just getting an additional opinion. Diversity of opinion is a great way to make sure that you don't walk headlong into a terrible decision. I agree on that side of things. You know, Kevin Durant said in his post-game presser after game 4, he's like, I just want to focus on the basketball. I don't want to be involved in player personnel. Now, whether or not that's true is another story. There's a whole narrative controlling side of this thing. But to me, that's the way that it should be. Do what you do best. Keep the main thing the main thing. Get somebody in the chair in the general management position. Problem is for the Lakers, they don't have that guy either. But get someone in the chair whose job it is every day to dive into the tape and figure things out there. And then the player, you're a basketball player. Figure out the basketball. That's all you have to focus on. Keep the main thing the main thing. So then the second question becomes, what about the assembly of superstars? Because you saw both teams, the Nets and the Lakers in particular, go after the third star and sacrifice depth as part of the process. Lakers send off key pivotal role players from their championship team to bring in Russell Westbrook, and the Nets send off key role players for James Harden that they in turn flip for Ben Simmons. And in that deal, they actually got a couple of role players in Seth Curry and Andre Drummond. So for them, it wasn't as much of a catastrophe, but you saw that happen. And I think there are two very specific reasons why I disagree with that strategy. I'm a big believer in the 2 stars, great role player depth, rather than 3 stars and veteran minimum contracts. And the 2 reasons why I believe in that is, one, there's a diminishing return with the third star. When you factor in the jobs that players have on the floor in a 5-man lineup, especially when you get to the postseason and everybody bumps up their minutes and your best players are all playing 40-something minutes, there's a diminishing return for number 3. Let's pretend everything went great for the Lakers this year and LeBron and Anthony Davis stay healthy and they make it to the first round. There's no way in the world, if LeBron and AD are playing 42 minutes a game in a playoff game, that you're going to have a great deal of on-ball responsibility for Russell Westbrook. That's just not the way the game works. Now, Russ also struggled in a lot of different ways, so I'm not alleviating him of responsibility in any sense in that regard, but strictly in the way that basketball works, being the third guy, you have less responsibility, thus requiring less talent. So it doesn't make sense to have a guy who's overqualified for that position unless you absolutely have to. And so I disagree with that strategy from that standpoint. That's the first side. The second part of it has everything to do with the way that defenses have evolved and how important it is now to have 5 guys on the floor that can capitalize on not being guarded. We talked a lot about this early in the playoffs. I said to you guys, NBA defenses are dangerously close to figuring out how to adequately double team stars and rotate on the back end and take away easy open shots on the back end. It used to be that you could have a Wesley Matthews, a guy who can knock down spot up threes, but not a whole lot else on that weak side corner. But now teams are closing out on Wesley Matthews and getting there in time off of double teams. So now what you need is guys that can attack closeouts. You need great offensive players off ball to capitalize on that attention. And so having a third star and then having really limited role players around them causes a predicament where now you have guys off the ball that aren't talented enough to capitalize on all that extra attention. This is why having, 2 stars and great depth is a better model. Look at the 2020 Lakers. Look at how important KCP was attacking closeouts. Look at how important Alex Caruso was. Look at how important Kyle Kuzma was. Look at how important Danny Green was. Having better offensive players in those roles, that when every team is throwing the kitchen sink at LeBron and AD, they have lots and lots of opportunity, and they're talented enough to succeed in that role. You saw there was a playoff game where Markieff Morris made 5 threes, and they could throw the ball to Markieff Morris in the right matchup down in the post. There was a bunch of different ways to go about it. And so I think in addition to the idea of taking control back away from stars in terms of personnel decisions, they simply don't have the time to watch enough film to be educated enough to make those calls. But also get away from this idea that you need to amass high-end talent. If you have 2 guys that you can dependably throw the ball to initiate offense, you don't need a third. Those 2 guys can figure out the give and take, and you're better off allowing them to be decoys half the time and take on the attention and let other guys go to work. Look at Jason Tatum. He's just taking double teams most times down the floor. It's guys like Marcus Smart making plays. It's guys like Jaylen Brown making plays. It's guys like Grant Williams making plays. Al Horford making plays off of the attention that Jason Tatum is grabbing. It's a really interesting concept. I'm curious to see over the course of the next few years if you see more big threes form or if you see more teams take on the 2-star role player type of concept. But that's just where I stand with it. I would go with take player personnel decisions away from the stars and build around 2 high-level players and get depth, because you need quality players around them to make people pay when they are throwing the kitchen sink at your stars.